Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter at Brew and Bean Coffee Shop for the third time that morning, her sleeves carefully pulled down to cover the intricate tattoo that wrapped around her left forearm. The morning rush was in full swing, and the familiar sounds of grinding coffee beans and steaming milk filled the air. She had been working at this downtown coffee shop for 6 months now, ever since she returned from her deployment overseas. The tattoo on her arm told a story that most people couldn't understand just by looking at it. It wasn't just decorative ink. It was a memorial, a tribute, and a reminder all rolled into one. The design featured a pair of military dog tags intertwined with roses, dates that marked significant moments, and names of brothers and sisters in arms who never made it home. But to the casual observer, it looked like just another piece of body art that young people got on a whim, Sarah had learned, to keep it covered during work hours after a few uncomfortable encounters with customers who made assumptions about her character based on the visible ink. She had heard the whispers, the judgmental comments about how unprofessional tattoos looked, especially on women. Some customers had even complained to her manager, suggesting that someone with tattoos shouldn't be working in customer service. On this particular Tuesday morning, the coffee shop was busier than usual. A convention was happening at the nearby hotel, bringing in crowds of business professionals and executives. Sarah moved efficiently behind the counter, taking orders and preparing drinks with the precision and attention to detail that her military training had instilled in her. Around 10 o'clock, a group of well-dressed business executives walked in, their expensive suits and confident demeanor marking them as the type of high-powered professionals who frequented the upscale establishments in this part of the city. They approached the counter with the air of people accustomed to being served, their conversation about quarterly reports and market projections continuing even as they reached the ordering station. The leader of the group, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary, barely glanced at her as he rattled off a complex order for his entire group. His tone was curt and dismissive, the kind that suggested he viewed service workers as invisible fixtures rather than human beings. As Sarah worked to prepare their elaborate drink orders, multiple variations of lattes, cappuccinos, and specialty beverages, she reached up to grab cups from the high shelf. The motion caused her sleeve to ride up slightly, revealing just a glimpse of the colorful tattoo beneath. The silver-haired executive noticed immediately. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of the ink, and he nudged his colleague next to him, pointing discreetly at Sarah's arm. The whispered conversation that followed was just loud enough for Sarah to catch fragments of their words. "Look at that," the man said to his companion, his voice dripping with disdain. "Tattoos all over her arm. Probably drugs, probably trouble. This is exactly what's wrong with young people today. No respect, no standards." His colleague nodded in agreement, adding his own commentary. "You can tell just by looking at her. Probably never held a real job, probably living off welfare. These coffee shop jobs are just stepping stones between whatever scheme they're running." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she continued preparing their drinks, her military training helping her maintain composure even as their words cut deep. She had heard similar comments before, but they never got easier to bear. These men had no idea that she had served 3 tours of duty overseas, that she had risked her life defending the very freedoms that allowed them to voice their ignorant opinions. The comments continued and grew more pointed. The third member of their group, a woman in an expensive blazer, joined the conversation with her own observations about how people like that were lowering the standards of customer service establishments. They spoke about Sarah as if she weren't standing right there, as if she were an object rather than a person. Other customers in line began to notice the conversation. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly as they witnessed the blatant disrespect being shown to the young barista. Others seemed to agree with the executive's assessment, nodding along with their commentary about declining social standards and the unprofessional appearance of service workers. Sarah completed their order with mechanical precision, her military bearing evident in the way she maintained perfect posture and professional demeanor. Despite the ongoing insults, she had learned in the service that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect was to continue performing your duty with excellence and dignity. As she handed over their drinks, the silver-haired executive made one final comment that would prove to be his biggest mistake of the day. Looking directly at Sarah with obvious disgust, he said loudly enough for the entire coffee shop to hear, This is exactly why I don't hire people with tattoos. You can tell everything you need to know about a person's character just by looking at them. No self-respect, no discipline, no future. The coffee shop fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Other customers stopped their conversations, sensing that something significant was happening. Sarah stood behind the counter, her face flushed but her composure intact, as the executive's words hung in the air like a challenge. What none of them knew was that among the other customers waiting in line was someone who would change the entire dynamic of this situation. Standing near the back of the coffee shop, a distinguished older man in a simple gray sweater had been watching the entire exchange with growing anger. His weathered hands gripped his coffee cup tightly. As he listened to the executive's cruel commentary about the young woman who was simply trying to do her job, the man had noticed something that the loud-mouthed executives had missed entirely. Despite their assumption that they could judge Sarah's character by her appearance, they had failed to observe the subtle signs that marked her as something very different from what they imagined. The way she carried herself, the precision of her movements, the respectful way she interacted with every customer regardless of how they treated her. These were the hallmarks of someone with a very different background than they assumed. The stage was set for a confrontation that would teach everyone in that coffee shop a lesson about the danger of making assumptions based on appearances alone. The older man in the gray sweater set down his coffee cup with deliberate care and began walking toward the counter. His movement was purposeful and measured, the kind of walk that spoke of decades of command presence and leadership. The executives were still chuckling among themselves about their clever observations regarding Sarah's character when they noticed the approaching figure. At first glance, the man didn't appear particularly intimidating. He was perhaps in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His clothing was casual but well-maintained, the gray sweater, khaki pants, and comfortable walking shoes of someone enjoying retirement. To the business executives, he probably looked like a harmless grandfather out for his morning coffee. But Sarah noticed something different about him immediately. There was something in the way he carried himself that reminded her of the senior officers she had served under overseas. His posture was perfectly straight without seeming rigid, and his eyes held the kind of steady intelligence that came from years of making life-and-death decisions under pressure. The man approached the counter slowly, his gaze moving between Sarah and the group of executives who were still congratulating themselves on their character assessment skills. The silver-haired executive noticed him approaching and turned slightly, probably expecting the older gentleman to voice agreement with their observations about declining social standards. "Excuse me," the man said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the immediate vicinity stop talking and pay attention. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about this young lady's character." The executive smiled smugly, assuming he had found an ally. "Oh yes, it's really quite obvious, isn't it? You can tell just by looking at people these days. No respect for professional appearance standards." The older man nodded thoughtfully as if considering this perspective carefully. "You know, you're absolutely right about being able to tell a lot about someone just by looking at them. In fact, I've been watching this young woman work for the past hour, and I've learned quite a bit about her character." Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, unsure where this conversation was heading. She had experienced enough judgment for one day and wasn't sure she could handle another lecture about her appearance, even from someone who seemed more respectful than the business executives. The man continued, his voice still calm but with an edge that the executives hadn't noticed yet. "From observing her work, I can tell that she has exceptional attention to detail. Every drink she's made has been prepared with precision and care. I can see that she has outstanding customer service skills, maintaining professionalism even when faced with difficult customers." The executives nodded along, thinking the man was building up to criticize Sarah despite these positive observations. They assumed he would follow with a but that would validate their position about her unprofessional appearance. "I can also tell," the man continued, "that she has extraordinary self-discipline and composure under pressure. Most people would have responded emotionally to the kind of disrespectful treatment she's received this morning, but she has maintained her dignity and continued to perform her duties with excellence." Theo, silver-haired executive's smile began to fade slightly as he realized this wasn't going in the direction he had expected. The other customers in the coffee shop had stopped pretending to mind their own business and were openly listening to the conversation now. But most importantly, the older man said, his voice taking on a steel-like quality that made Sarah's spine straighten with recognition, "I can tell that this young woman has the bearing and discipline of someone who has served her country with honor. The way she moves, the way she responds to pressure, the respect she shows to others regardless of how they treat her. These are the qualities of a trained soldier." The coffee shop fell completely silent. The executives looked confused, unsure how to respond to this unexpected turn in the conversation. Sarah felt a mixture of surprise and gratitude that someone had recognized her military background without her having to announce it. The older man wasn't finished. He turned to face the executives directly, his kind demeanor shifting to something much more formidable. "So you're absolutely correct that you can judge someone's character by observing them. The question is whether you're observing the right things." He gestured toward Sarah with obvious respect. "This young woman has demonstrated more honor, discipline, and professionalism in the past hour than I've seen from anyone else in this establishment today. She has earned the right to be treated with respect, regardless of what you think about her personal choices regarding body art." The lead executive's face was beginning to redden, both from embarrassment and from anger at being contradicted so publicly. "Now look here," he began, his voice rising. "I don't know who you think you are, but I have every right to my opinions about appropriate workplace appearance. Tattoos are unprofessional, period. They indicate poor judgment and lack of respect for social standards." The older man smiled slightly, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I think you raise an interesting point about judgment and respect for social standards. Perhaps it would be helpful if I shared a bit about my own background and experience with such matters." Something in his tone made the executives shift uncomfortably. The man's casual demeanor was giving way to something that spoke of significant authority and experience dealing with exactly these kinds of situations. "You see," he continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent coffee shop, "I've spent most of my adult life learning to evaluate character and leadership potential. It's been my job to identify the qualities that make someone trustworthy, dependable, and worthy of respect. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that character has nothing to do with the artwork someone chooses to put on their skin." Sarah found herself standing straighter behind the counter, recognizing the tone and cadence of a military briefing. Other customers in the coffee shop were beginning to sense that they were witnessing something significant, though they couldn't yet understand exactly what was happening. The silver-haired executive, however, was too committed to his position to back down. His pride had been challenged in front of his colleagues in a room full of strangers, and he wasn't about to admit he might have been wrong about anything. "That's all very philosophical," he said dismissively, "but the reality is that appearance matters in the professional world. Companies have standards for a reason. People with tattoos, especially covering their arms like that, are making a statement about their priorities and their respect for conventional business practices." The older man nodded slowly, as if the executive had just provided the perfect opening for what he wanted to say next. "You know what? You're absolutely right that people make statements with their choices, and sometimes those statements reveal far more about their character than most people realize." The tension in the coffee shop was building toward something significant, and Sarah had the feeling that whatever happened next would change how everyone in the room thought about judging others based on their appearance. The older man reached for the hem of his gray sweater with deliberate slowness, his movements precise and purposeful. Every eye in the coffee shop was focused on him now, sensing that something pivotal was about to happen. The business executives watched with a mixture of curiosity and growing unease, while Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat as she began to understand what was coming. "Since we're discussing the statements people make with their appearance choices," the man said calmly, "I think it's only fair that I share some of my own story." He began to pull up his sweater, revealing first a simple white undershirt, then gradually exposing his left forearm. What emerged from beneath the fabric made several people in the coffee shop gasp audibly. The man's arm was covered in an intricate sleeve of military tattoos, each one clearly telling a story of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood. The artwork was extraordinary in its detail and meaning. Near his wrist was a detailed rendering of the Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor emblem, surrounded by dates and coordinates that marked significant battles and deployments. Moving up his arm were the names of fallen comrades, each one rendered in elegant script and accompanied by small symbols, representing their units and the circumstances of their sacrifice. The centerpiece of the sleeve was a large depiction of the American flag, its colors still vibrant despite the obvious age of the tattoo. Wrapped around the flag were ribbons bearing the names of every major engagement where Marines had fought and died, from Iwo Jima to Fallujah. The artistry was museum quality, clearly the work of someone who understood both the technical aspects of tattooing and the deep significance of military service. But it wasn't just the quality of the artwork that stunned the onlookers, it was the clear indication of the man's military background and the obvious care and respect with which each element had been chosen and placed. This wasn't random decoration or youthful rebellion. This was a living memorial, a permanent record of service and sacrifice that spoke to decades of dedication to something larger than oneself. The silver-haired executive's mouth fell open as he took in the full scope of what he was seeing. His confident assertions about tattoos indicating poor character and lack of professionalism suddenly seemed not just wrong, but deeply offensive given the context of what was being revealed. The older man continued rolling up his sleeve, exposing even more of the memorial artwork that covered his arm. Near his elbow was a detailed depiction of a military cemetery, complete with rows of white crosses that represented the brothers he had lost over the course of his career. Above that was a banner reading Semper Fidelis in bold letters, surrounded by the insignia of every unit he had served with during his time in the Corps. Each of these tattoos, the man said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the silent coffee shop, represents a moment, a mission, or a person that shaped who I am. They're not fashion statements or signs of rebellion. They're reminders of the most important experiences of my life and tributes to people who gave everything for their country. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she recognized the similarity between his memorial sleeve and her own tattoo. She had never met anyone else who carried their military service and loss in the same permanent, visible way that she did. The artwork on his arm told stories that perfectly paralleled her own experience of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the weight of surviving when others didn't. The business executives stood frozen, realizing that their confident judgments about character and professionalism had just been completely undermined by someone whose credentials they couldn't question. The man's demeanor, his obvious education and sophistication, and now the revelation of his military service created a cognitive dissonance that left them struggling to maintain their previous position. But the older man wasn't finished with his demonstration. He reached for the other sleeve of his sweater and began rolling it up as well, revealing another extensive collection of military-themed artwork. This arm featured a detailed map of Southeast Asia with specific locations marked and dated, clearly indicating tours of duty in Vietnam. The names of military bases, operation codes, and unit designations covered every available space, creating a comprehensive record of a military career that had spanned multiple decades and conflicts. I got my first tattoo in 1968, the man continued, his voice taking on the quality of someone sharing a deeply personal history. I was 19 years old and about to deploy to Vietnam with the 3rd Marine Division. My platoon sergeant, a man named Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, had a tattoo of the Marine Corps emblem on his forearm. He told us that getting that tattoo was his way of making a permanent commitment to the Corps and to the men he served with. The coffee shop remained completely silent as he spoke, every person present understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the executives, despite their obvious discomfort, seemed compelled to listen to what this man had to say. Over the next 35 years of service, he continued, I added to my collection. Each tattoo marked a significant moment, a lost friend, a successful mission, or a lesson learned under fire. When I retired, my arms told the complete story of my military career. Every name, every date, every symbol had meaning and purpose. He looked directly at the silver-haired executive who had started this confrontation. So when you suggest that tattoos indicate poor character or lack of professionalism, you're not just wrong about this young woman behind the counter. You're also wrong about thousands of military veterans who carry similar reminders of their service. The executive's face had gone from red to pale as the full implications of his earlier statements became clear. He had not only insulted a young veteran trying to make an honest living, but he had done so in front of someone whose military credentials clearly far exceeded anything he could claim for himself, the other customers in the coffee shop were beginning to understand that they were witnessing more than just a disagreement about workplace appearance standards. This was becoming a lesson about the danger of making assumptions and the importance of treating all people with basic respect and dignity. Sarah found her voice for the first time since the confrontation began. "Thank you," she said quietly to the older man, her voice thick with emotion. "No one has ever understood before." The man smiled at her with genuine warmth, the kind of expression that passed between veterans who recognized their shared experience. "What's your unit, Marine?" he asked, using the tone of a senior officer addressing a subordinate with respect and affection. "3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, sir," Sarah replied automatically, her military bearing evident as she responded to what she now recognized as a superior officer's question. The man's smile broadened with obvious pride and recognition. "Outstanding unit. I served with 1st Marines during my final tour in Iraq." "What's your MOS?" "Combat medic, sir. 3 tours, Iraq and Afghanistan." The pride in his expression intensified as he processed this information. A combat medic with 3 tours of duty was someone who had seen the absolute worst of war and had dedicated her service to saving lives under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. The revelation that Sarah was not just a veteran, but a decorated combat medic who had risked her life repeatedly to save others seemed to hit the business executives like a physical blow. Everything they had assumed about her character based on her appearance had been not just wrong, but offensively wrong. The older man's expression shifted to one of deep respect and recognition as he processed Sarah's military background. A combat medic with 3 tours was someone who had voluntarily placed herself in the most dangerous situations imaginable, repeatedly risking her own life to save wounded Marines and soldiers. The significance of this revelation was not lost on anyone in the coffee shop who understood anything about military service. "Colonel James Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, retired," the man said formally, extending his hand to Sarah across the counter. The introduction hit the room like a thunderclap, instantly reframing everything that had transpired in the previous 15 minutes. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized she was face to face with a full colonel, one of the highest-ranking officers she had ever met personally. She straightened to attention automatically before reaching out to shake his hand with obvious respect. "Hospitalman Sarah Martinez, sir. It's an honor." The business executives looked as though they had been struck by lightning. They had spent the morning mocking and belittling not just any young woman with tattoos, but a decorated combat veteran who had served 3 tours in active war zones. Even worse, they had done so in front of a retired Marine colonel whose military credentials and authority were unquestionable. Colonel Mitchell turned to address the crowd that had gathered in the coffee shop, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding the attention and respect of large groups. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand exactly who you've been privileged to meet this morning. Hospitalman Martinez is what we call a Fleet Marine Force corpsman, a Navy medic assigned to Marine combat units." He gestured toward Sarah with obvious pride. "These men and women voluntarily embed with Marine infantry units during the most dangerous combat operations. When Marines are wounded under fire, it's the corpsman who runs toward the shooting to provide medical care. They risk their lives repeatedly, not for glory or recognition, but because they've taken an oath to preserve life and serve those who serve alongside them." The silver-haired executive shifted uncomfortably, beginning to understand the full scope of his mistake. His colleagues looked equally mortified as they realized how badly they had misjudged the situation. Colonel Mitchell wasn't finished with his explanation. "A corpsman with 3 combat tours has seen things that most people can't even imagine. They've held dying Marines in their arms, performed life-saving medical procedures under enemy fire, and carried wounded comrades to safety while bullets flew around them. The tattoos that these gentlemen found so offensive are likely memorials to the men and women she couldn't save, despite risking everything to try." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the colonel's words validated experiences she had never been able to properly explain to civilians. The tattoo on her arm wasn't just decoration. It was a permanent reminder of Sergeant Mike Torres, who had died in her arms during a firefight in Fallujah, despite her desperate efforts to save him. It included the coordinates of the field hospital where she had worked 18-hour shifts, treating casualties from improvised explosive device attacks. Every element of the design held memories of sacrifice, loss, and the weight of survival. The colonel rolled up his sleeves further, revealing additional details of his own memorial tattoos. "This is Sergeant First Class David Park," he said, pointing to a name surrounded by Korean characters near his shoulder. "He saved my life during my first tour in Vietnam by throwing himself on a grenade that would have killed our entire squad. He was 22 years old." He moved his finger to another section of the artwork. "This is Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, the first female Marine I had the honor of commanding in combat. She died defending an Iraqi school full of children from insurgent attack. She was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for her heroism." The personal nature of these revelations created a profound silence in the coffee shop. Every person present understood that they were being allowed to witness something sacred, the sharing of memories, and loss that connected these two veterans in ways that civilians could never fully comprehend. Colonel Mitchell looked directly at the business executives, his expression stern but controlled. "So when you make assumptions about someone's character based on their tattoos, you might want to consider that you could be looking at a living memorial to heroes who gave their lives for the freedoms you enjoy every day." The silver-haired executive finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. We didn't know. We had no idea she was military." The colonel's response was swift and pointed. "And why should that matter? Even if Hospitalman Martinez were not a veteran, even if she were simply a young woman working an honest job to support herself, what gives you the right to judge her character based on her appearance? What makes you think your assumptions about tattoos are more valid than her right to be treated with basic human dignity?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, exposing the fundamental flaw in the executive's thinking. Their judgment hadn't been based on any real knowledge about Sarah's character, qualifications, or background. It had been based purely on prejudice and assumptions about what tattoos meant about a person's worth. One of the other executives, a woman who had remained mostly silent during the earlier confrontation, stepped forward with obvious embarrassment. "You're absolutely right, Colonel. We were completely out of line. Our behavior was inexcusable, regardless of anyone's background or service record." Sarah watched as the dynamic in the room shifted completely. The same people who had been nodding along with the executive's judgmental comments 15 minutes earlier were now looking at her with respect and admiration. Several customers approached the counter to thank her for her service and apologize for not speaking up earlier when she was being mistreated. But Colonel Mitchell wasn't quite finished making his point. He had one more revelation that would drive home the lesson about assumptions and respect in a way that none of them would ever forget. "There's one more thing I think you should know about making judgments based on appearance," he said, reaching into his wallet and pulling out a business card. "My civilian career, which began after I retired from the Marines, might interest you." He handed the card to the silver-haired executive, whose eyes widened as he read what was printed there. The man's face went completely white as he absorbed the information, and his hands began to tremble slightly as the full implications became clear. The business card identified Colonel Mitchell as the chief executive officer of Mitchell & Associates, one of the largest defense contracting firms in the region. More importantly for the executive's immediate concerns, the company was a major client of the consulting firm where the silver-haired man worked as a senior partner. The executive realized that he had just spent the morning publicly humiliating a veteran in front of one of his company's most important clients. His career prospects had just taken a devastating hit, not because of anything the colonel might say to his superiors, but because he had revealed his own character and judgment in the worst possible way. The transformation was complete. The confident, dismissive businessman who had walked into the coffee shop that morning was now facing the consequences of his prejudice and poor judgment, while the young woman he had mocked was being recognized for the hero she truly was. The business card seemed to burn in the executive's trembling hands as he stared at Colonel Mitchell's corporate credentials. Mitchell & Associates was not just any defense contractor. They were the primary consulting firm his own company relied on for their largest government contracts. The silver-haired executive realized with growing horror that he had just demonstrated his character and judgment in the worst possible way in front of someone who could destroy his career. With a single phone call, Colonel Mitchell watched the man's face cycle through various stages of realization and panic with calm satisfaction. He had not revealed his civilian identity to threaten or intimidate. but rather to complete the lesson about the dangers of making assumptions. The executive had judged Sarah's worth based on her appearance, never considering that his own actions were being observed and evaluated by someone whose opinion could have real consequences for his professional future. "I think this presents an interesting learning opportunity," the colonel said mildly, his tone suggesting that he was genuinely interested in using this situation to educate, rather than simply punish. "You see, while you were making assumptions about Hospitalman Martinez's character based on her tattoos, I was making assessments about your character based on your behavior." The other customers in the coffee shop continued to watch in fascination as the power dynamic played out. Many of them had pulled out their phones and were discreetly recording what had become an extraordinary lesson in respect, prejudice, and consequences. The colonel continued his explanation with the methodical precision of someone delivering a military briefing. "In my position as CEO, I regularly evaluate potential business partners, employees, and contractors. Character assessment is a crucial part of that process, because integrity and judgment matter enormously in the defense industry." He gestured toward the executive, whose expensive suit and confident demeanor now seemed like costume pieces that couldn't hide his fundamental lack of character. "When I observe someone publicly humiliating a service member based on superficial prejudices, that tells me everything I need to know about their integrity and judgment. Those are not the kind of people I want my company associated with." The implications of this statement hit not just the silver-haired executive, but his colleagues as well. Their entire firm's relationship with one of their biggest clients was now in jeopardy because of one man's inability to treat a young veteran with basic respect. Sarah watched the exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She was grateful that someone had finally stood up for her and recognized her service. But she also felt sorry for how completely the executive's world was crumbling around him. She had learned in the military that character was revealed under pressure, and this man's character was being exposed as fundamentally flawed. The executive finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate whisper. "Colonel Mitchell, please, we made a terrible mistake. If there's anything we can do to make this right." The colonel raised his hand to stop him. "The mistake wasn't made against me, sir. It was made against Hospitalman Martinez. She's the one you owe an apology to, and she's the one who deserves to have this situation made right." All eyes turned to Sarah, who suddenly found herself in the unexpected position of having power over the people who had been tormenting her just minutes earlier. The executives waited anxiously to see how she would respond, clearly hoping that her military training in honor and duty might lead her to show them mercy they probably didn't deserve. Sarah looked at the group of executives, then at Colonel Mitchell, then at the crowd of customers who were all waiting to see how this remarkable situation would resolve. She thought about the countless times she had been judged unfairly because of her tattoos, the jobs she hadn't gotten because employers made the same assumptions these men had made, and the constant need to hide her memorial artwork to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation. But she also thought about the values that had been instilled in her during her military service: honor, integrity, and the importance of being better than those who wronged you. "I accept your apology," she said quietly, her voice carrying the dignity and strength that had sustained her through 3 combat tours. "But I want you to understand something. This tattoo that you found so offensive is a memorial to Sergeant Mike Torres, who died in my arms during a firefight in Iraq. He was 24 years old, and he died protecting a convoy of supplies being delivered to an orphanage." The executives listened in stunned silence as she continued. "Every element of this design represents someone who didn't make it home, or a place where good people gave everything for something bigger than themselves. When you mock my tattoo, you're mocking their sacrifice and their memory." She rolled up her sleeve fully for the first time that day, revealing the complete artwork that covered her forearm. The design was indeed intricate and beautiful, but more than that, it was clearly a work of love and remembrance. The dates, names, and symbols told a story of service and loss that no one in the coffee shop could question or dismiss. "I hope," Sarah continued, "that the next time you see someone with tattoos, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that you don't know their story, their struggles, or their sacrifices, and maybe you'll choose to treat them with the same respect you'd want for yourself or your own children." The silver-haired executive nodded frantically, tears actually forming in his eyes as he fully grasped the magnitude of his mistake. "Yes, absolutely. I promise you this will never happen again. I've learned something very important today, Colonel Mitchell smiled with obvious pride at Sarah's response. Her ability to show grace under pressure and educate rather than simply punish demonstrated exactly the kind of character he had recognized in her from the beginning. But the colonel had one more surprise that would ensure this lesson had lasting impact beyond just the people present in the coffee shop that morning. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking quietly but urgently to someone on the other end. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but when he hung up, his expression suggested that significant things had been set in motion. "Hospitalman Martinez," he said formally, "I've just spoken with the president of our company's charitable foundation. We've been looking for ways to support veterans transitioning to civilian careers, and I think you might be exactly what we're looking for." Sarah's eyes widened as she began to understand what he was suggesting. The other customers in the coffee shop leaned in closer, sensing that this remarkable morning was about to reach an even more extraordinary conclusion. The colonel continued, "We have an opening in our medical services division for someone with your background and qualifications. The position involves coordinating medical support for our overseas contractors and ensuring that our personnel receive the best possible care in challenging environments." The job offer was not charity or pity. It was recognition of Sarah's genuine qualifications and the value she could bring to an organization that understood and appreciated her military experience. The salary he mentioned was more than triple what she was making at the coffee shop, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement, based on merit rather than appearance. The executives who had spent the morning judging her character watched in amazement as the young woman they had dismissed as unemployable was offered a prestigious position with one of the region's most respected companies. Sarah stared at Colonel Mitchell in disbelief, her hands shaking as she processed the incredible opportunity he had just offered her. After months of struggling to find employment that recognized her skills and experience, after countless interviews where potential employers focused more on her tattoos than her qualifications, she was being offered a position that would actually utilize her medical training and military background. I don't know what to say, sir," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure? You don't even know me." The colonel smiled warmly. "Hospitalman Martinez, I've learned more about your character in the past 30 minutes than most people reveal in multiple interviews. Your composure under pressure, your professionalism in the face of disrespect, and your grace in handling this situation tell me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." He gestured around the coffee shop, where dozens of customers were still watching the extraordinary scene unfold. "Everyone here has witnessed your integrity firsthand. That's worth more than any resume or reference letter." The business executives stood nearby, looking shell-shocked as they watched the young woman they had dismissed and mocked being offered a prestigious career opportunity. The silver-haired executive seemed to age 10 years in the span of the conversation, finally understanding the full scope of his prejudice and its consequences. Sarah looked around the coffee shop at all the faces watching her, some sympathetic, some amazed, some clearly moved by what they had witnessed. She thought about all the mornings she had spent hiding her tattoos, enduring subtle and not so subtle discrimination, and wondering if she would ever find a place where her service was valued more than her appearance. "Yes, sir," she said finally, straightening to attention. "I would be honored to accept the position." The coffee shop erupted in spontaneous applause. Customers who had been silent observers throughout the confrontation now cheered openly for Sarah's good fortune. Several approached to congratulate her personally and thank her again for her military service. Colonel Mitchell turned to address the broader crowd. "I hope everyone here will remember what we've witnessed today. We've seen how dangerous it can be to judge people based on assumptions and appearances. We've also seen how important it is to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." He looked directly at the business executives. "And we've learned that character is revealed not by how someone looks, but by how they treat others, especially those they perceive as having less power than themselves." The silver-haired executive stepped forward, his face flushed with shame and determination. "Colonel Mitchell, Miss Martinez, I want to make sure this lesson reaches beyond just the people in this room today. Would you be willing to let me share this story with others? I think it could help prevent other people from making the same terrible mistakes I made." Sarah considered his request carefully. Part of her wanted to keep this private, to avoid any more attention or scrutiny. But she also recognized an opportunity to help other veterans who might be facing similar discrimination. If it helps other people understand that tattoos don't define character, then yes, she said. But I want people to understand that this isn't just about veterans. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect regardless of how they look or what personal choices they've made about their appearance. The executive nodded eagerly. Absolutely. That's exactly the message that needs to be shared. Colonel Mitchell handed Sarah his business card with the details for her new position. Report to our headquarters Monday morning at 800. We'll get you started with orientation and introduce you to your new team. As the crowd in the coffee shop began to disperse, people continued approaching Sarah to congratulate her and share their own stories of being judged unfairly based on appearance. A young man with multiple piercings told her about losing a job opportunity because of his facial jewelry, despite having excellent qualifications. An older woman with visible scars from cancer treatment shared how people often stared and made assumptions about her health and capabilities. The coffee shop manager, who had been watching the entire exchange from behind the counter, approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. I am so sorry, she said. I should have stood up for you earlier when customers complained about your tattoos. I knew you were one of our best employees, but I was afraid of losing business. Sarah hugged her manager, understanding the difficult position she had been in. It's okay. Today changed things for all of us. The business executives gathered their belongings to leave, but the silver-haired man lingered for a moment. Miss Martinez, he said quietly, I want you to know that I'm going to make sure my company implements new training programs about unconscious bias and respect in the workplace. What happened here today can never happen again, not on my watch. Sarah nodded, appreciating his commitment to change. Thank you. That means a lot. As the morning crowd dispersed, Colonel Mitchell remained to speak with Sarah privately. I want you to know, he said, that this job offer isn't charity. You've earned this opportunity through your service and your character. But I also want you to understand that you have the potential to do more than just work for my company. He explained that Mitchell and Associates was always looking for qualified veterans to eventually start their own consulting practices, with full support and partnership from the parent company. Your medical background and combat experience make you uniquely qualified to help other companies understand how to better serve and employ veterans. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the possibilities opening up before her, from the discrimination and struggle of the morning to career opportunities she had never imagined. Her life had transformed in the span of a single conversation. 6 months later, Sarah was not only thriving in her new position, but had become a spokesperson for veteran employment rights. The story of her encounter at the coffee shop had spread through social media and news outlets, sparking conversations about appearance discrimination and the hidden stories behind people's personal choices. The silver-haired executive had kept his promise, implementing comprehensive bias training at his firm and speaking publicly about the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. His experience had genuinely changed his perspective, and he had become an unexpected advocate for fair treatment in the workplace. Colonel Mitchell continued to mentor Sarah as she developed her own consulting practice focused on helping companies better understand and support their veteran employees. Her tattoos, once a source of discrimination, became a powerful symbol of service and sacrifice that helped bridge the gap between military and civilian. Understanding, the coffee shop where it all began placed a small plaque near the counter reading character is revealed not by appearance, but by actions. It served as a daily reminder to customers and employees alike about the importance of treating everyone with respect and the danger of making assumptions based on how someone looked. Sarah never forgot the lesson she learned that day, that standing up for yourself and others, maintaining dignity under pressure, and showing grace in the face of adversity could transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. Her tattoos remained exactly where they were, visible and proud, telling their story of service, sacrifice, and the strength that comes from surviving and thriving despite the judgments of others.